Hello and welcome back. So this is your look at the fantasy playoff schedule. There's two different formats that we're going to look at. Playoff schedules that start week 22 and go to week 24, and playoff schedules that start at week 23 and go to 26. Now, I didn't really want to do this yet because so much can change from now until your fantasy playoffs. We could have more rescheduled games. There could be massive trades that impact the strength of schedule, etc. But I've been getting a ton of requests to do something like this, so here we go. Now, this preview is intended to give you a sense of some teams to potentially target players from in trades and potential waiver pickups going forward, and some teams that you might want to avoid because their schedules are jam-packed on all the heavy nights and they're not playing a ton of games. So if you have star players on some of those teams, maybe think about a trade and getting a player that's going to give you more volume during the playoffs. But this preview is all about maximizing games played for your fantasy playoffs, and we'll give it the usual weekly scheduled treatment. So let's jump in. Now, before we get going, this is the preview for week 22 to week 24 playoffs. So if you have your playoffs going from those weeks, now it's not going to be everybody. I've been getting a bunch of people in the comments saying that they have different playoff schedules. So this is the first little preview. This is total games played for that entire stretch during the playoffs. And what you notice here is Boston has the most games played during week 22 to week 24. So they have 12 games played. A bunch of these teams up here have 11: Carolina, Colorado, Columbus, Montreal, Rangers, Nashville, Jersey, Ottawa, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Toronto, Vancouver. I'm not going to read them all. But nonetheless, the thing that you're going to want to take away from this particular chunk of the schedule is just this is the maximum amount of games that you're going to get in any given week, and these guys are going to have the minimum amount of games: Minnesota, San Jose, Seattle, Vegas. But that doesn't mean that these are better or worse schedules. We have to break it down by when they play in that given week. This is the exact same thing for the playoff schedules that are week 23 to week 26. That's what I have. These are the last 3 weeks of the NHL season, and it comes with this disclaimer. So this game, Colorado at Predators, was originally scheduled for November 25th, now scheduled to take place on April 14th, which is the last day of the regular season. Now, it was very difficult to do this video because every schedule that I was looking at had a different amount of games played for these particular weeks because of these rescheduled games. So you see the plus ones up here for each of these two teams. The data that I used for these background images here, this was the original schedule given out by the NHL. So I did the schedule, the data draft schedule planner type of thing early in the season, and I was giving that out during the preseason. You could look at every schedule, and we feature it in every weekly video. But these are not updated because it's the original Excel spreadsheet from the league. So I had to add these in. And this game is going to add one game for obviously Nashville and Colorado and put them in this tier with Carolina and Detroit with 14 games that week. But again, not all of these games are created equal. So let's break it down. Now, week 22, if this is your week 1 of your playoffs, there are a couple of things that you notice. The Red Wings and Panthers only play twice this week. So if this is when your playoffs start, I'd make a move to get Husso, Bobrovsky, Spencer Knight off of your roster, trade them for a goalie from one of the teams with 4 games, potentially, because goaltending is going to be impacted by this more than anything else, because if you don't get the goalie starts, if you don't hit the minimum, you're going to either have to stream goaltenders and you lose some forward streams that you might need, or you're going to potentially not hit the threshold and lose all your goaltending categories if that's how you play. But other than that, the teams that you want to look for are these obvious teams in green, but let's break it down in terms of what has the best and worst schedules. So for week 22, 3 schedules stand out. Now, 14 teams play 4 times. No teams play, actually those 2 teams play twice. This was originally going to be the week 23, so I didn't change that for whatever reason, but there are 2 teams that play twice. 14 teams play 4 times, but Buffalo has the best schedule, so they play all the off nights. So you're looking at Monday only has 3 games, Wednesday has 4, Friday has 4. Sunday isn't that light, there's 7 games, but a perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule for Buffalo. They have Toronto, they're in Toronto. They do typically play pretty well there, but we'll have to wait and see. They're in Washington, they're in Philadelphia, and then they're back home against Boston, which will be a difficult game at the end of that week. But you get 3 light nights out of all of your Sabres players on this particular week, week 22, which is the first week of your playoffs, if that's when your playoffs are. Toronto has the second best schedule. Obviously, these two teams play each other. They have Colorado, so a little bit more of a difficult matchup there. They play Carolina. That's a difficult matchup there. And then they're a back-to-back with travel to Ottawa on Saturday, and that's a heavy night. So you're probably only going to get, if you have Matthews or Marner or any of these guys, you're going to get 4 games. You're going to play them no matter what. But they are on the second night of a back-to-back with travel on that Saturday, so it's a little bit heavier. If you have any waiver-type players that you're picking up off of Toronto, then those guys might not get in on Saturday. For Colorado, they're making a Eastern Canadian road trip on this particular week. They're in Montreal on Monday. That's a light night. That's an excellent start to the week. Then they're in Toronto. Obviously, these two teams playing each other. Then they're a road back-to-back against Ottawa. So that's not a ton of travel, but it is a road back-to-back nonetheless. And then the heavy night on Saturday where they're also playing away in Detroit. So these schedules set up well because they all have at least 2 light nights, Monday and Wednesday. Toronto plays an additional light night on Friday, and Buffalo has all 4 technically light nights. So these are the best schedules from Week 22. The worst schedules, as declared by me. Actually, no, this is a different schedule play you can make for Week 22. So Week 22, you can manipulate the schedule this way. If you want to use 2 player adds and 1 roster spot, you can get 5 games out of this week by doing this. You can take a Dallas Star player who's playing an away back-to-back, but it is a favorable second night of the back-to-back as it stands right now with strength of opponent. Or you could take Montreal players. Now, they have a very difficult back-to-back against Colorado, and then with travel involved to Pittsburgh. So that's going to be difficult to mine some fantasy value out of, but you will get 2 games out of players that you pick up off of Dallas and Montreal. Then you drop those players Wednesday morning, and you pick up a Duck player or a St. Louis Blues player. And they play the off nights the rest of the week. So Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. The reason I did this, I wanted to highlight these 2 teams at the bottom because they do play 3 off nights. They only have 3 games that week, but they do play all the off nights. And Anaheim, despite the fact that they're not a great team, they're playing some easier opponents that they might actually have a chance in, and there might be some offense in some of these games as well. So you could potentially add some fantasy value there. St. Louis has a little bit harder of a schedule during this stretch, but they do also play Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. There's a little bit of travel involved, unlike Anaheim, who plays all their games at home. So this is just another schedule play you can make where you get 5 games played out of 1 roster spot, but you do have to use that add on the. You have to add the player before the week, and then you have to drop him and then add somebody else on that Wednesday morning. Just something to think about. Now the worst schedules for Week 22. Detroit, not a very good schedule there. They play only 2 games, and they're both on heavy nights, so you're not going to get them in the lineup. And you're especially not going to get them in the lineup because this is an away game at Nashville, and then they play the Colorado Avalanche on Saturday. You're not going to want to play them against Colorado, so that's going to be a difficult schedule if you own Dylan Larkin or any of their top 6 or Mo Sider. So keep that in the back of your mind. Florida, Thursday and Saturday, there's a 2-game schedule, very similar on both of the heavy nights. They do have a little bit more of a favorable opponent on Thursday, but the Devils should be a difficult matchup on Saturday, and it's a very heavy day. This Saturday, is 15 games, so you're going to have to make choices as it is with your roster. So it's going to be difficult to add guys that are also playing on Thursday, Saturday, etc. The Devils also have a difficult schedule. They played Tampa Bay 3 times. That's kind of crazy in 1 week. And they're all, 2 of them are the heavier nights, Tuesday, Thursday. Then they play at Florida on Saturday and at Tampa Bay on Sunday. So really tough schedule for the Devils on this particular week. So that impacts your Jack Hugheses and Dougie Hamiltons, etc. The Rangers, not much better. All of these games are at home. That does make a little bit of a difference. These are all divisional opponents for the first chunk, and they're all heavy nights. These should be difficult games to for the players to get production, but sometimes players rise to the occasion and they like the challenge of playing a divisional opponent, so that could potentially boost their numbers for these games, but you're going to have a hard time getting some of the other guys into your lineup because these are all the heavy nights, and then they have a back-to-back Saturday, Sunday, so not great, but not bad, in terms of, you're not going to drop Adam Fox or something like that because of the schedule. Now, Winnipeg, they also have the same Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, and these are some difficult opponents to start the week. Carolina, they're in Carolina, then home against Boston, and then they have a road back-to-back against Nashville and St. Louis. And, who knows where St. Louis is at this point in the season, but it's still a road back-to-back, which is going to be a little bit problematic. Now, for week 23, this is week 2 of the playoffs. If you start on the 22nd, this is obviously week 1 if you start on the 23rd. So a bunch of teams play 4 times, a bunch of teams play 3 times. Nobody plays twice. So let's get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. So week 23 schedule, those teams at the top here play 4 times, but not all 4-game schedules are created equal. The best one by far is Colorado. Chicago on Monday, Pittsburgh Wednesday, and then Arizona home and home Friday and Sunday. That's very good. You're getting 3 non-playoff teams, and you're getting all 4 light nights with some breaks in between. No travel, no back, or a little bit of travel, but no road back-to-backs or anything crazy like that. Now, this is an interesting one because I also put Arizona in the worst schedule of the week. So I'll get into that part when we get to the worst schedule, but they do play 3 light nights, so Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So if your lineup is jam-packed Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, at least these guys are going to get into the lineup. And that might impact Chychrun owners if he stays there. We don't know that yet. It could impact Gostisbehere owners if he's back. Other than that, there's maybe Keller, maybe you have Krause or Schmaltz or something, and those guys could get you some production of some kind because they're playing 3 games on the off nights. These teams play 2 off nights. Pittsburgh has a home game at Ottawa, and then they're a road back-to-back with Colorado and Dallas. That's going to be tough. And then back home to face the Caps. That's a lot of travel, and it's a road back-to-back in the middle of the week, so that's not ideal. But they do have 2 light nights at least. So if you wanted to stream guys for the front half and then drop them on Thursday, that could work. But just letting you know that these 2 teams play 2 Monday and Wednesday. Then the Oilers, same type of thing with a little bit easier competition. San Jose, Arizona, they have a heavy game, a heavy night game on the Saturday with Vegas. So this is probably one of those things where you stream the guy Monday and Wednesday and drop him Thursday, unless you have McDavid and Draisaitl and Evander Kane. Then you're kind of stuck with this schedule, but they're going to get in the lineup no matter what on Saturday, so somebody else has to come out. Now, these 2 at the bottom are not great schedules. They're just schedules that have 1 off game or off night game. So Calgary plays Monday against LA. They have a favorable second night of the back-to-back, but then they also have a favorable game on Saturday. So maybe you want to take advantage of that and play that into your decision making for who's going to get in your lineup on Saturday. For Detroit, they're at home against Florida on Monday, so that could be a decent game. But then they have to travel to St. Louis on the second night of a back-to-back. That'll be a tough game. Then they're back home against St. Louis, and then on the road in Philly on 2 heavy nights. So not the best schedule. The best 3 are these 3 up here, Colorado, Arizona, and Pittsburgh. But I did say that Arizona had one of the worst schedules, and that's because of who they're playing. But before we get into that, Carolina, they do have 4 games this week, and so on volume, you'd think, okay, that's great. But they're playing the Rangers, who they seem to have a problem with in some circumstances, because obviously they lost to them in the playoffs last year, and they did have a hard time with them going back several years now. They beat them in the bubble, but other than that, they've had a traditionally hard time against the Rangers, and they play them twice. This could be a potential playoff matchup preview, so the intensity could be high for this game. The players that you have might get up for those games and produce. But then they have a home back-to-back against 2 of the best teams in the Atlantic, Toronto and Boston. So this is a very difficult schedule in terms of strength of opponent, even just looking now, because I don't think things are going to change that drastically where any of these teams are going to drop out of the playoffs. For Arizona, they have Winnipeg. That's a tough game. They have to stop Connor McDavid on the second night of a back-to-back. That's going to be tough. Then they're in Colorado. So this is the end of a road trip in Colorado. That's not a great place to end a road trip. And then you have to come back home and face Colorado. So that's very difficult schedule-wise for Arizona, which is why they're on the hardest schedule of the week as well as the best, because they do play 3 off nights, but it's all very difficult matchups. Now, LA, the problem here is you play a guy on Monday, which is great because it's an off night, and they have an off game on Sunday, but then there's nothing in the middle of the week. So none of your Kings players are going to play during this chunk of the schedule. and some of them might not get in this game against Winnipeg. So, balance that with what else you know about this schedule and try to make some decisions when the time comes. There's nothing really you can do beforehand to make that kind of easier decision. Ottawa, road back-to-back in Pittsburgh and in Boston. That's not a crazy amount of travel, but it is travel on a back-to-back. Then they come home and face Tampa, which is not easy. Then they go on the road to New Jersey. That's not going to be easy either. And both of these are very heavy nights. So is Tuesday. So these are not great schedules in terms of your fantasy players trying to get in the lineup and have reasonable opponents to play. So that's week 23. Let's move it on to week 24. I know this video is dragging on. There's no way to cover this any quicker. So this is March 27th to April 2nd. This would be championship week if your playoffs start week 22. And obviously almost exactly half the league plays 4 times and half plays 3 times. And you'll remember that for this stretch, Boston had the best schedule with 4 games every week, and they become the obvious target for championship week as well. But let's take a closer look at the schedules. Now, there's no perfect off night schedules. So we're looking for the most amount of off nights, and the most we're going to get is 2, and that might come from one of these teams. So Florida is doing that Eastern Canadian road trip. So they'll have a game in Ottawa on Monday, in Toronto on Wednesday, so 2 light nights. Then they're in Montreal on the second night of a back-to-back on Thursday, and then a pretty favorable matchup on Saturday, so you may be able to get your Panthers in on that game. For Colorado, it's an excellent matchup on Monday against Anaheim, and then they have a home game against Minnesota on Wednesday, so 2 light nights, and then they're staying home for a game against Dallas on the 13th. For Buffalo, their 2 off nights are spread out, so it's kind of like LA, what we just saw. You're getting your guys in on Monday against a pretty favorable opponent, and then Friday against a difficult opponent, and then their second night of a back-to-back with a little bit of travel involved to Philadelphia, so you may or may not get these guys in. Minnesota, you have the Monday and Wednesday, Seattle and Colorado, and then a away game in Vegas on Saturday, so that's not going to be easy. Winnipeg, Tuesday, and then they have Friday and Sunday. Sunday's not light, but you will probably get these guys in, and they're not the craziest. I mean, this is a nice setup here on Tuesday. You might be able to get them in then, and then Winnipeg against Detroit. This could be a game where you're going to get some value because it's a light night for Friday. And then Jersey on Sunday is going to be a tough matchup, but at least you're probably going to get them in because there's only 9 games. As we switch to the hardest schedules, the Rangers, they have a relatively easy game Tuesday. You can prioritize them that night, but then a 3-game road trip, including a road back-to-back in Jersey and Buffalo, finishing off the week in Washington, which will be a tough game. All 3 playoff teams, potentially. I mean, we don't know what Buffalo's going to do, but they're on the border, so they could have 3 potential playoff teams in the back 4 nights of the roster of the schedule that week. For the Islanders, they have a very difficult schedule because of the strength of their opponents. Now, obviously, they play Monday, Wednesday, which is favorable a little bit. But then they also, they have Jersey, they have Washington, they have Tampa and Carolina, and that's a road back-to-back. So that's some travel involved. That's 2 very difficult teams in the Atlantic. And then they don't have any easy games this particular week. So you might want to stay away from Isles, and we'll get into that in the summary. LA, 3 heavier nights, and they're on the Western Canadian road trip. So this is not favorable at all as they move from Calgary to Edmonton to Seattle, and then a road back-to-back in Vancouver. That's brutal. Going Western Canadian road trip during your fantasy championship game potentially. So keep that in mind if you're a Kings owner, because that will potentially impact some of your production, because this is going to be difficult for this team to produce offense and continue to provide you fantasy stats. Now, for the next week, if your playoffs were week 22 to week 24, you can just cut this video off and skip to the summary. For people like me who have 23 to 26 playoff schedules, this is the championship week for you. As I mentioned, this schedule is a little bit wonky because this was the original Excel file. So obviously that makeup game puts Colorado at 7 games. It puts Nashville at 7. I found Columbus had an extra game in here. I couldn't figure out where the other extra game was. it got messy. I spent 3 days on this stupid project, and I hate it because it's pointless. But I'll get to that at the end. But nonetheless, this is your championship week. Obviously, the Isles 4-game week, that's going to be potentially significant. And then Seattle, Colorado, Nashville have the 7-game weeks in 12 days. So let's get into it. Championship week, by far and away, the best schedule for this week is the Seattle Kraken. Not only do they play 7 times, but most of the games are against lesser opponents. So they have Arizona, then they have a road back-to-back, or a back-to-back with travel to Vancouver. But at least it's not, a crazy opponent that they're going to have to, it's not that much travel going from Seattle to Vancouver. Then they're back home against Arizona again. They have Chicago, then they've got Arizona. So a lot of those are potentially gettable matchups. Then they have some difficult matchups on some heavy nights against the Vegas Golden Knights on Tuesday and Thursday to close out the season. But they might be fighting for a playoff spot. They might be fighting for Pacific Division standings. So these games might mean something, and there might be some intensity there, some offensive production. Who knows? Like I said, we're way too far out to get into the nitty-gritty on some of these. But just a quick overview, this is a very nice schedule for the Seattle Kraken that week. The second best schedule is Colorado. So again, pretty favorable matchups here, despite the fact that they're on heavy nights. You're going to want these guys in your lineup anyway. They're away. They have 2 away games in San Jose for some reason, so they're just going to stay in San Jose Tuesday through Thursday. Then they go for a road back-to-back, but it's not that much travel from LA to Anaheim. And 3 of these teams are probably non-playoff teams, or at least San Jose and Anaheim. 3 of these games are not going to be against playoff teams. And then LA, that's a difficult matchup, but who knows what's going on with their goaltending right now. So that game could produce some goals as well. Then they have a game against the Oilers at home on that Tuesday. That's a little bit heavier. And this will be a nice matchup here against Winnipeg. And then they've got that makeup game. They're traveling to Nashville, so that's a little bit more difficult. But nonetheless, it's still a pretty favorable schedule. And guys like McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, these are guys you're going to have in your lineup no matter what. So it's good that you're getting a lot of volume out of these guys, and that could potentially help you out during your championship week. So keep that in mind. Nashville, this is a brutal schedule in terms of strength of opponent. Playoff team, who knows, maybe, and playoff team. So I could see a scenario where every single team that they're playing this particular week is a playoff team or fighting for playoff positioning during this week. So this is a very difficult matchup, especially for a team that doesn't score a lot. Their power play is struggling, at least at the time of making this video. So it's very difficult matchups for Nashville, but they do have 7 games in 12 days. And again, this is a situation where for 2 of these games, they're going to have to start their backup. So if you're looking at Colorado, they're going to have to start Francouz here and here at the very least. Here, they're going to have to start Lankinen here or here in one of those games. So you'll get 5 starts from Saros if you have it, and then you'll have to get 2 starts out of Lankinen at a bare minimum. And then the same thing goes here. So if you have Grubauer, or if you could target Grubauer, he's going to get a game here, and he's going to get a game here at the very least. So you're getting 2 games from the backups of each of these teams in these championship weeks. That could make or break your fantasy season. It could all come down to that one waiver ad. We'll have to look at that a little bit closer when the time comes. But this is a look at the best schedules from the championship week. Let's look at the worst schedules for the championship week. And the Islanders are number 1. So they only have 4 games in this extended week and 2 very difficult opponents, 2 not so difficult opponents. But they're only playing 4 times and there's only 1 off night, and it's this game against Montreal. The rest are heavy nights, Monday, Saturday, Thursday. So if you have Islanders, well, we'll get to that at the end, but drop them before week 23. So this is not a good schedule for Islanders owners. For Blue Jackets, they're away against one of the best in the Atlantic, away against one of the best in the Metro, home against one of the best in the Metro, and then they have a pretty favorable matchup there, and then a difficult back-to-back at home against Pittsburgh and Buffalo. So this is, not a ton of volume. It's 6 games, but it's not, 4 games like the Islanders. But the strength of schedule, they're playing at least 4 playoff teams, maybe 5 if Buffalo can squeak in. So it's not that favorable, and there's some travel involved, albeit not a ton of travel. But this is not necessarily the best schedule for your guys that you own on Columbus, and that's probably going to be Line and Goodrow, and maybe a defenseman, depending on how that shakes out towards the end of the season. But yeah, maybe want to think about trading Line or Goodrow if this is going to potentially make you a little bit worried heading into your championship week. Montreal, they also have a very difficult schedule. 3 of their 5 games are against playoff teams. 4 of 5 are on heavy nights. The only off-night game is against the Isles, and they travel home to face Boston on the 13th. So the only game your Habs would maybe get in would be Wednesday the 12th. Or Wednesday so this game right here would be the only one that you would be maybe prioritizing getting these guys in. Otherwise, they're on all the heavy nights and they're against very difficult teams. So not a great schedule for Montreal, and the same type of thing with Ottawa. So this is a heavy night against probably one of the best in the East. This is a heavy night game away in Florida, then back home against Tampa. They have Carolina on a heavy night, and then Boston on a heavy night. So nothing favorable there for your Ottawa Senators, and that's going to impact your Kachucks and Stutzlas and Shabbats and everything else. So let's just summarize everything that we went over today. It's been a long video. Just seeing it here visually, there are some obvious trends. Colorado has the best schedule for all of these weeks, and they'll likely be pushing to make the playoffs and get home ice. So they'll have to perform in these games as well. They're behind the schedule right now. They're not in a playoff position as I make this video, at least the last time I checked. And they're going to have to be pushing down the stretch to get in and to make an impact in terms of trying to get home ice advantage. So the fact that they have the best schedule, or one of the best schedules in every one of these weeks, that's something that you could potentially use to your advantage. Maybe you target a guy like Lehkonen, maybe you target Nichushkin, maybe you target Landeskog if he's still out there, potentially being floated in a trade. You're probably not going to trade for McKinnon or Makar. Nobody's going to give them up, but if you can get them off of them, then go for it, because they're going to have an excellent schedule during your playoffs. Buffalo has 2 excellent weeks in this stretch if your playoffs are 22 and 24. So the first week of the playoffs, your Buffalo Sabres are going to get in a lot. And the last week, the championship week, they're going to get in a lot. So that could impact you if your weeks are 22, 23, and 24. And then Seattle has a great 7-game week in this one, as we just saw. Same with these 2 teams as we just saw. So those are all the positives. Now for the negatives, all of your Islanders should be off of your roster no later than week 23. They should not be owned during 24, 25, and 26. There's just not enough volume there, and they're not a good enough team where you'd want to, desperately hold on to one of these guys. Sorokin is the only guy that you could maybe justify holding on to through this stretch, because he's probably going to play most of those games, and he's still elite. So other than that, I would maybe look to dump Barzal, Lee, Nelson, Pajot, any of those guys, because they're just not a great schedule at the tail end of your fantasy playoffs, especially if you're week 23 to week 26. And this is your championship week. This is your semifinal week. You're going to need production, and those guys aren't going to get it for you. The Rangers also have 2 relatively bad schedules in these weeks, so that may affect some of you with their top 6 or 7 guys: Fox, Zibanejad, Panarin, all those guys. Shesterkin probably. LA has 2 difficult or hard, bad schedules, whatever you want to call it. So does Ottawa. So that may affect some of you who own Fiala, Kopitar, Doughty, Stutzla, Batherson, Kachuk, etc. So yeah, this is just to give you a visualization of what it would look like in terms of the teams that are most frequently popping up on the worst schedules and the best schedules. The big question is, what do you do with this information? Maybe you go out and target a few of those guys that I mentioned. Maybe you pick up Francouz as your G3. Maybe if you have this particular championship week schedule, maybe you hold on to Vince Dunn and Justin Schultz for your championship week. Maybe you target Philip Grubauer as your G3 in that week. Again, maybe you get rid of Matt Barzal. Maybe you trade some of your Isles or Sens or Rangers, looking at this schedule and how it pans out. But this entire look at the schedule has been about one strategy, and that is adding more games played to these weeks. More games played doesn't even mean production. Typically it will, but a 3-game week from a guy like McDavid is always going to be more valuable than a 5-game week from anybody else. So if you have a hits or blocks guy who has a heavy week in your fantasy playoffs, Does that mean that he'll actually add more volume? Well, maybe. It could also mean something similar to what happened to Radko Gudas when Ekblad went down earlier in the season. He got way more ice time than he was used to, and he didn't hit as much and became fantasy irrelevant because that's the one thing you own him for. So there's no crystal ball, and this entire video is relatively pointless because we still have so much time between now and when these weeks are happening for you to actually extract insights and make a difference in your fantasy playoffs. The only thing that I'll say is that Colorado Avalanche are a good priority to have. If you can trade for some of the top dogs, that would be a play. Obviously, some of the Sabres guys, that would maybe be a play. We talked about some of these as we went through the video, but for all of you who have been worried about this schedule and wondering what to do, maybe you can use this info to make some tweaks to your roster, but don't tear apart your entire team based on this strategy of trying to maximize games during your playoffs. I don't want to freak anybody out and have people go out there and, trade some of their best players just to get somebody who's playing more games in a specific week in their fantasy playoffs. That's not going to necessarily win you the week. So just a cautionary reminder there. But that's going to do it for this video. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe. I did hit 2,000 before the All-Star break, so I want to thank all of you who subscribed. I believe Jared caught it live as it happened as we hit 2,000, but then I went backwards from there, so some of you unsubscribed. But nonetheless, we hit 2K. I reached the goal, so thank you very much if you're a regular Data Draft watcher. But that's going to do it. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.